Um, I'm going to give a pretty normative urban planning kind of perspective on place. And I really deal in the world of what ought to be happening, and it might be too top down for some folks in this room, and not enough about collaboration on things. But we're supposed to be having a debate, right? We can't agree on everything. So maybe I'm being the devil's advocate here. Um, so this work that I'm going to present to you is a commentary on density through a placemaking lens. We know that for sustainability reasons, cities need to be compact and therefore they need to be dense. And we need this also to maximize access, to promote productivity and innovation, foster social connection. We know all those things about density. And I think that bringing together a critical mass of people is what density is about. And it creates conditions that sustain social organizations, street life, small businesses, make it feasible to locate services within walking distance for residential populations. It's just a key component of what a sustainable city is all about. And we also know that to make density work, to make it something loved rather than feared, it needs to be embedded in a good place. So that's where I'm coming from. So here I want to make some observations about the connection between density and especially the context of density and the creation, maintenance, and quality of place. When it comes to place, definitions of what makes a good place are, of course, dependent on individual perspective. We've been hearing a lot about that so far today. But there are certain critiques about the built American urban landscape involving qualities of place that are now so well recognized that I think they've become pretty conventional. We have so many places where there is no there. And usually it's a result of a lack of certain principles about the design of the built environment. It's about being too car-centric, prioritizing cars, lack of pedestrian quality, design gestures that have absolutely no purpose, not having a sense of enclosure, like David's wonderful example of from Italy. But a key point is that these well-identified problems are not location agnostic. Lack of some of these principles about car dependence and lack of enclosure are just not the same problem in the suburbs that they are in the middle of the city. And within the city, they take on special significance and importance when they are in particular areas. That's a big part of my argument. And I'm going to argue that one category of that is near public assets. Potentially, there is kind of a win-win situation here between density and place. We need density to create meaningful places, and good places, at least in an urban context, are supported by density. For this magic kind of alignment between density and place to work, the alignment such that density is sustained by place and place is sustained by density, what this all translates to is really paying attention to the context of density. So I have been studying three types of public assets in Chicago. Stations, transit stations, pedestrian retail spaces, retail streets, and parks, community and neighborhood parks specifically. And I think that what I've really been honing in on is where density is in relation to these three assets. Because in a normative sense, an urban planner would come to this and say, this is where we need density. We need density near stations, we need it near parks, and we need it near these pedestrian retail streets. And so my comments are directed at the issues of density and its role in the quality of place near these assets. And I'm going to argue that the three examples of where density is most needed, these three particular places, this is very location specific, right? This is not density everywhere. This is density in very specific places. And it's fundamental to how we build cities sustainably. And we need people to live close by to these areas. So one of the things that I have found in just looking at this relationship between where people are living and where these assets are is a kind of alarming lack of correspondence. And I've been looking at this over time too, over the past 100 years. And so, unfortunately, what we find in Chicago and probably all over the US, quite frankly, is really a failure to pay attention to this kind of context of density, a lack of density in the right locations near public assets. 100 years ago, there was a relative, oh, sorry, I didn't advance that. Let's try it this way. This is what I'm showing. So 100 years ago, we had a relatively small number of areas, and all this 100 years ago, this whole boundary of Chicago was very well developed. This is not encompassing a lot of suburban area here. But if you look at the top quartile of high density, and then you create some metrics for distances to these different public assets, it was a much smaller area that had that kind of unhealthy situation of having high density and no proximity to assets. And you can see that now, 100 years later, there's that lack of connection has really mushroomed. So what this all boils down to is that parks are trying to be safe and well used without the surrounding density they need. Remnants of retail streets, the top image there, are really trying to hang on, and transit stations are trying to be more than park and ride. And all three of these assets are struggling. And then, of course, we, on the other side, we stick density in places that have no business being dense. They're not near parks, they're not near transit stations, they're not near walkable retail streets. They have no access to these things. So that's kind of the flip side of the equation here. So what does any of this have to do with place? Well, let me just talk about the lack of place quality that is very much tied to, it's tied up in this whole discussion of relating density to public assets. I guess the good news is, though, that this is also giving us clues about what it is that needs to be done. So how does place support density? Take a good place, a good public place, and you can just see its connective ability, as others have been talking about, its ability to play an essential role in sustaining density. For example, as shown here, this is on the north side of Chicago. You'd see there's a diversity of building types. There is, so it's linking all kinds of different walks of life. There is social diversity here, and it's all sharing a collective space. Note that that collective space does not need to be large at all to still function as something extremely valuable. No one would say that the provision of shared space here in the form of a great place like this is all that is needed to support density, but it's certainly a critical element. The provision of public spaces for casual or spontaneous interaction isn't creating some sort of deep social bond, but weak social ties that we know are also very necessary and important. And you can see that, if it seems pretty obvious that if you have density without such a place as a congealing element, a socially connective element, something major is going to be missed. And I think this translates to a lessening of seeing density as valuable and loved, and instead seeing density as something to bear. So how does density support place? I think that's probably obvious to a lot of people in this room, but we know we need density for sustainability reasons. We need density for good places too. And of course, there's a whole history of people saying this, Jane Jacobs included. Um, and we need density to create that kind of shared experience that happens in a place. um, Higher density areas like city neighborhoods often foster a strong sense of this everyday use, this everyday repeated use. And it can be pretty depressing if you find investments in public space, say a large plaza, um, where there is no surrounding density at all. And it can become pretty bleak. Spaces too large are viewed as amorphous, not particularly valuable as an urban spatial experience. Large open plazas in the city, bleak and windswept. There's a lot of people who have recognized this over the years, including Tony Hiss, of course. And so it's a missed opportunity, because without density, this plaza doesn't really function like a defining civic core or a space that congeals a diverse population, like I showed before. There is no surrounding population to congeal. So now I just have a few remaining slides to show some examples of high versus low density around these public assets in Chicago, and kind of show you what that all means. So for that pedestrian retail street, here's a situation of high versus low density. And here we see streets as elements of public space. And both of these streets have been, by the way, designated by the city of Chicago in an official way as pedestrian streets. But one has high density and one has low density. So on the left, with density, we're seeing streets functioning as connectors. The streetscape is a habitable space rather than a conduit for moving cars. It's really conceptualized as public space. So there are people there, and that's all impacted by density. On the right, we see also a pedestrian retail street. It does not have density, lacks human scale. It might be good for external connectivity, but there's a cost to that kind of external connectivity. Disruption of pedestrian quality, probably a loss of social connection. It's unlikely that there's a sense of the collective, and I do wonder who actually cares about it. What about parks? Here's high and low density around parks. And by the way, this is current, using current data. So I'm still working on the going back 100 years situation. Although I have all the data. The high density park reads like a space carved right out of the neighborhood as a place for its otherwise very dense kind of dwellings. Front doors engage directly on the park. Density is relieved by this park, and the park fulfills a social and a civic function. The low density park is fronted by commercial and industrial uses on two sides rather than the fronts of buildings where people are living. What it lacks are places that front the residences that front the park directly, engage with it, have a sense of ownership, as Tracy was talking about. So there's a certain lack of caring and responsibility for this park. At least that's how it reads, and perhaps a lack of appreciating a park's social value in this context. And what about station areas? Station areas, same kind of story. There are lots of station areas in Chicago with no density at all, and it's really pretty tragic. And it's, you know, you can have places that are just all surrounded by parking lots. You don't have, nobody's really paying attention to the place quality of these areas around stations. And again, density having a lot to do with it. On the left there is a station area, people living right up against transit in Chicago. I don't know if you guys have been to Chicago, but our beloved elevated transit houses are this close to it. And the places that have that surrounding density for this public asset of a transit station are doing quite well, actually. So this is my last slide. This is kind of a frightening AI generated, show me a density without place, show me place without density. There's crazy stuff AI will come up with for you, but I do think, I'll just say that I do think we need to get our collective act together when it comes to linking density and place. We know that good places require density. We know that density requires place. So it's about linking these two things together. Density does come in many shapes and sizes, and of course, so does place. I think the complexity of all of that can get pretty overwhelming at times. But I also think we shouldn't overcomplicate matters. I simply think and want to emphasize, as many others have done, that place needs to be a key component of any discussion about density, and often it isn't. Not in every circumstance. Again, this is very location specific. I think when we talk about density being added to some suburban location, it's just a completely different conversation. So there are a lot of public spaces trying to be good places without density. And there's a lot of density that is happening without paying attention to the necessity of place. And that's my main message. So thank you very much.